Hey everyone, before we start, just want to say a few things. For one, the copy of this game used for this review was provided by Square Enix. That being said, all of my opinions are my own, and this review copy has not influenced my opinions at all. We will still be calling attention to some things that could be improved, while also talking about the things that I liked. For sake of the viewers looking to avoid spoilers as well, use this as your spoiler warning. We'll only be using footage from early portions of the game previously featured in trailers, and we'll be largely avoiding any cutscene related footage. The only exception to this is that after this little spoiler warning, the intro to the game will actually play as background to some of my initial comments, so I don't have any other spoilers being present there. So if you haven't seen the intro, that's your one big spoiler warning coming up right after this. That being said, there still might be things you haven't seen, so this is your chance to step away from the video. We'll also be avoiding mentioning any direct story spoilers as well. What we will discuss in this video are my general opinions on the story without citing specific scenes, characters, area design, gameplay, game length, game features, content, post-game content, and character growth, including weapons, materia, and leveling. So if any of those things you would consider a spoiler, please click away from the video and save yourself, because we still got a few days before the game globally releases. And with that, hello everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to my early review for Final Fantasy VII Remake. We're finally here. It officially releases on April 10th, but here a few days beforehand, I'm here to tell you about my experience with the game. Like I said, I had a review copy provided by Square Enix, and I have finished one entire playthrough on the normal difficulty. Even spoiler-free, I have a lot to say, so let's start. So let's get the hardest section to not drop spoilers out of the way first and just talk about how I felt about the story. Now, Final Fantasy VII Remake has been the subject of a lot of curiosity, we'll call it, among fans of the original. This game is simply the first game in a series of games covering the events of the original Final Fantasy VII, which was multiple discs, but was still just one game. Now, they've rewritten certain things, expanded upon a lot of story elements, and really taken the opportunity with this remake to flesh out what the story is actually trying to tell you. Now, that's what they told us, but how do you take what was just a few hours from the original game and successfully expand upon it to make it a full-length, full-price AAA title? Well, they did exactly what they said. Final Fantasy VII Remake takes those original few hours and expands it into roughly a 30-hour experience. Now, this is including a few basic side quests along the way that you'll almost no doubt stop to do, which does take the time to bring to life some of the citizens of Midgar, both some from the original game as well as some new ones. Some have challenging enemies to fight, and some are simply fetch quests, but they're mostly an opportunity to remind you that Midgar is a living, breathing city, and they really want to get that scale and that scope of just how important the citizens of Midgar are out of the way with some of these quests, plus the dialogue in the main story. The overall result of all of this is a 30-hour experience that feels more whole and complete than I would have expected, having played the original as many times as I have. There felt like there was more meaningful character growth and interaction, largely driving the expanded plot forward. Now, for those with experience with the original, the majority of scenes you'd expect to see are there, often with similarly corny dialogue. There's some favorite lines and events that are sure to draw smiles, and honestly, almost anything you can think of that you experienced in the original, you'll experience in some way here in the remake. Fortunately, for those of you who have no experience with the previous title, it'll all be brand new, so you don't have to worry about any of that. Now, there's new plot elements that may catch fans of the original off guard, but knowledge of the original I found helped understand some of these new scenes in greater detail. People exploring it for the first time again, honestly, might be a little confusing. I found that there were parts where I was like, how would someone who doesn't know what's happening here really understand it without somebody else explaining it to them, especially during the later segments of the game. There's even some segments that if you played the original, you'll still be like, what? And I really can't figure out another way to describe it. That's just the face that I made when I saw it. In short, it's the same, but it's brand new in a lot of ways. I really want to talk about specifics, but we won't, because I promised I wouldn't do spoilers. We will eventually do a spoiler video where I do nothing but talk about spoilers for people who have finished the game and just really need an outlet to keep it away from the people who haven't played yet. So since we already spoke on this a little bit, I can talk a little bit more in detail about character growth, but again, avoiding those spoilers. And honestly, I think character growth, specifically the main cast, and even some of the supporting cast, I think the remake excels at this above any other detail. There are plenty of interactions both in and out of combat that build a meaningful connection between these characters far beyond anything the original could have achieved. The main cast has a great deal of extra care put into just making you love them, between hilarious new dialogue lines, common references to the original script, and all new scenes. I smiled, I laughed, and yes, I teared up on a few occasions. Even writing and reading this part brings me back to some of those scenes with a little bit of swells around my eyes, because it tugs on all the different heartstrings. Now, this growth is further enhanced by that expanded Midgar that they promised us. Areas connecting the various locations utilize design details from the original and incorporate a real sense of scale with the events of the game. Citizens and establishments you encounter don't just feel like randomly placed shops or filler NPCs, but people dealing with day-to-day problems in the world, gossiping about recent events that you may have just transpired in, and teasing upcoming plot points. I will say though, at times NPCs talk way too much, sometimes during important character moments when you're just walking through an area. I'd like the option to adjust the voices of the citizens' idle chit-chat as I walk by, whether it to be to turn the volume down or turn it off altogether. I gotta say, if I have a standout character that I'd recommend that you pay careful attention to, it'd actually be Barrett, much to my own surprise. I love the new Barrett after getting these 30 hours with him, and honestly, I like all the characters, but Barrett, just something special about him that I really, really loved as I was playing through. Now, I gotta stop there with story and characters because I wanna say too many things. Even that Barrett comment feels like a little too much to me, but we'll move on with it. As for actual gameplay, we'll be discussing my experiences on the normal difficulty. The game offers you classic, easy, and normal when you start it up, so consider this, I guess, the hardest difficulty you can start the game with. For those who haven't been keeping up, Final Fantasy VII Remake combines an action combat base with flavors of turn-based combat laid over top, as well as various systems from other Final Fantasy games in recent years. You'll attack, defend, and dodge in real time, with a couple of different attacks that change depending on which character you're actually using. But you'll be able to use these actions to generate ATB, which is a gauge that fills up in your party list. You can have up to 2 full ATB bars, and each of them will allow you to perform a single action. That action includes abilities, magic, items, limit breaks, and summons. While you can choose to hotkey 4 of these commands you use often in battle for quick access, I actually prefer going into the menu the entire time I play the game. This actually slows the game down while you select your action. This feels like an homage to old school turn-based RPGs, something more akin to the wait function in the original Final Fantasy VII. It gives you a strategic break, a time to analyze the situation, and plenty of time to pick the right action. Now, the available commands to use your ATB gauge on come from a mix of places. Again, we're going to be mentioning specific item names. There may be different names of weapons listed on the screen. Just another spoiler warning. I figured I'd cover my bases. So as you progress in the game, you'll buy or find a number of weapons for each character. While each of these weapons has its own skill tree and can be upgraded throughout the game, each of them kind of filling a different role for the character, they all also come with a skill for your character to unlock. You can use that skill while you have the weapon equipped, but you'll also be given the option to become proficient in the skill by meeting certain conditions in battle. This usually involves using the skill in a pretty particular way. Once you're fully proficient, which really doesn't take that long to do, you unlock the skill permanently, allowing you to use it even while wearing other weapons. Collecting a weapon and unlocking skills is a high priority throughout the game, and almost every time you pick up a new weapon, you'll want to go through the upgrade process and then pick up this skill's proficiency. Now, the weapons do have that skill tree, which is kind of like the Crystarium from Final Fantasy XIII. As you level up and find manuscripts, which are items throughout the game, you'll acquire skill points, which will allow you to enhance these weapons in a variety of ways. It's not very limited, and more options open up to it later in the game, but I found it a little clunky to actually access. There was no easy way to change between weapons once in the Crystarium screen. There's a little bit of a delay between entering and leaving the actual screen itself. There's an auto use button, but a lot of the times you want to take very particular skills based on the point in the game and your actual necessities. So I found that the auto use really wasn't something that I wanted to use more than a single time just to test it. Now, among the things you can unlock when you're actually going through the skill tree are additional materia slots, and that's another way that you can acquire skills to use on the ATB gauge. You can equip materia to your weapon and armor for each of your characters. These unlock a slew of different things. You can have offensive and defensive spells. You can have just flat stat boosts or even changes to a linked spell or a linked materia. You can also learn new skills, and there's even a limit break that's available as a materia in there. You'll want to be stocked up on plenty of materia on all of your characters, as equipped materia gradually levels up to unlock newer spells or enhance better boosts, or even to better the skills that you learn. There's also summon materia, which every character can equip one of regardless of what they're actually equipped with. When obtained during boss fights, you'll eventually be allowed to perform a summon and expend ATB to utilize their incredibly powerful actions. Upon the summon gauge running out, it will use a super powerful attack before leaving the arena. I found that it was an okay summoning system. I was kind of not a super big fan of only being able to use it in boss fights, and at times it was kind of hard to gauge how effective I was really being with it. It really needs you to pump your ATB gauge use into the summon in order for it to be very, very effective. So make sure that you're thinking of timing the use of it with specific boss phases and specific boss mechanics. Finally, there's limit breaks. These are powerful skills often used to punish a staggered or weakened enemy, or come back from a dire situation. The gauge is charged when staggering enemies and taking damage, so keep an eye on them throughout the fights and figure out when your best chance to use them is. Now, while you'll only start with one limit break for each character, there are other limit breaks out there. One of them was even available as materia, and I could choose which character actually equipped it. Oh, and in battle, you can also use items. I almost forgot to mention that. Outside of battle, you don't need ATB gauge. You can just go through your items and just spam them while you're standing there. But in battle, they're going to cost ATB gauge. So if you need to recover from a tight situation with an item like a Phoenix Down or an Elixir, make sure you have ATB gauge saved for that exact scenario. Now, in addition to these actions, enemies can be pressured and staggered to stun them and open up a chance to deal devastating and often lethal damage. Different enemies have different stagger conditions, with some being simply exploiting their weakness, while others encouraging you to wait for just the right opportunity to strike. This forces engaging decision making, especially in the boss fights, which can be really long if you brute force them and don't pay attention to their stagger conditions. If you'd like to learn more about staggering them, most enemies you can get this information by assessing them. Using the assess materia, which will be introduced early on, allows you to get all sorts of details about them and even covers some really basic things. Times you've exploited a weakness, if you've learned a certain skill from them with the enemy skill materia. So there's all sorts of great information there, but I found that re-accessing that information in combat was not super accessible. I had to wait till after battle to remind myself about certain things while I was hunting certain enemies. Now, with all this information, all these different situations, stagger conditions, it's fortunate that each character does feel very different to play and handles different situations more effectively, encouraging common character swaps and issuing commands whenever your AI-controlled allies have actually gotten enough ATB gauge. The AI of the ones you aren't controlling isn't particularly effective, so you really need to stay on top of all your party members to utilize their skills as effectively as possible. They won't automatically use most actions for you, so you really have to be in control of them when you want them to do something in particular. All of this combined actually made normal difficulty more challenging than I expected. I mean, it was nothing exhausting, and I was often able to recover from bad situations with a bit of patience, but I suspect some people are going to be felled by quite a few bosses in the game. Now, in regards to difficulty, I mentioned that my story playthrough without tackling post-game content was roughly 30 hours. After completing the game on the normal difficulty, I unlocked a chapter select option, a play log to track key details about my save file, as well as a hard mode, which is much stronger enemies, items being disabled, and only health being restored at the rest points. Checkpoints are also disabled, but on top of that, some manuscripts are only available on hard mode, items that boost SP when found. Honestly, I loved every minute of the gameplay, more so than I really expected even after playing the demo. It really helped carry those 30 initial hours in what felt like an instant. I found myself swapping to Tifa most often whenever she was available. She's a monk, and honestly, I think she's got some pretty good abilities that you'll just have to see for yourself. Now, before we wrap up this review, I've said a lot of things, but there's still one thing people are probably wondering about. post-game content. Now 30 hours on normal without post-game sounds pretty good, but people are probably wondering what post-game there even is. I'd argue hard mode is definitely among those things. The play log even tracks how many chapters you've beaten on hard mode. But without spoiling it too much, there are a number of post-game battles for you to take part in. There are also some challenges that are locked exclusively behind hard mode, and some challenges that are locked behind beating every other challenge, including the challenges locked behind hard mode, so thus they're hard mode locked. So if you really want to experience all the post-game, you're going to have to do hard mode. Fortunately, with chapter select, you don't have to play through the whole game again if you really don't want to, and on top of that, you get bonus EXP and AP after beating the game, plus there's materia that speeds up EXP and AP acquisition as well. So, the grind out to actually get to that post-game stuff, if you're not interested in playing the whole game again, is available to you. So, there's a lot I want to say about 7 Remake, and I feel like I just need to wrap up on answering one very simple question with a long and complex answer that nobody asked for, but I'm going to give you anyway. Is it worth doing Final Fantasy 7 Remake like this, taking a portion of the original game that took, most people who played the original like 5-ish hours to get through, expanding it into a 30-hour experience, expanding the story, expanding the characters, giving them a little bit more growth, tying a bunch of new progression into it? Is it worth doing it like this? Is it worth not just trying to fill out the whole game in a single purchase? And honestly, I think that's still up to the individual. I know no matter what I say, there's going to be people who fight back and forth on that point, but the game I've experienced here was phenomenal. And if they keep the scale, if they keep the quality of this game going into the future parts, then I'll be perfectly okay with buying every individual one. By the time I'm done with everything on hard mode, plus I've done all of the post game, I'll probably be looking at 60 to 70 hours total, and that's a pretty good thing for what is ultimately a super small portion of the original game. Now, I want to say, it's not perfect. I don't want people to think I'm holding back certain details because I was given a review copy by Square Enix. So I also want to take this chance to say a few things that were absolutely tedious or even a little bit annoying. I already mentioned the weapons being a little bit laggy going inside and outside the Crystarium. Navigating the menus, there's a few shortcuts that definitely could be added to make it a little bit more useful. I found that even trying to go into my inventory to use potions wasn't something I could do. I had to use it in the menu out in the world, which sometimes when you want to pop potions outside a battle could take way longer than I wanted it to. There's also other things like characters that are in your party kind of bumping into you and making it hard to line up with certain interactables. Certain interactables also felt like they were really specific about where I needed to stand for them. So there was a number of times where I'm like, come on, line up, which again, a minor thing, but it adds up over 30 hours. On top of that 30 hours I've said like a million times at this point. There are certain points where it felt like while they are trying to expand Midgar, they're trying to make it so that all the connecting points, things that used to be black loading screens between certain areas in the original, at points it definitely feels like they went a little bit overboard. There are certain sections of the game that are long, doesn't really feel like they're long for the sake of moving the narrative a certain way, but they're long because they're dungeons and they want to make Midgar as large as possible. It allowed for a lot of exploration. There were all sorts of little secrets that I could find, things that were teased on my minimap or things that I could see in the distance, and all those details are great, but it certainly has its points where you're like, all right, come on, we don't need to be here for this long. But even then, it wouldn't even shave off that much time if I got rid of all the parts I'm thinking of in particular. In the end, all I know is I had a great time playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I can't wait to play through on the hard mode. I'm not a super Final Fantasy VII diehard. It's not even in my top 3 of all-time favorite Final Fantasy games. But this remake just might make its way into the top 3. I'm going to give it a bit of time to digest it, let go of some of that recency bias. But even with all the little things that were certainly a little bit tedious, it doesn't really stop that the whole time I was just mouth open, just completely in awe of what I was experiencing. The emotional moments, the funny moments, the characters, how much they accomplished in such what I would consider a small portion of the grand scheme of things is unbelievable. And if all of the games are of this quality, then I will probably be that way for every game, and thus, maybe I just judge it all as one game. Maybe I just judge the whole experience and I just tack it on as I go through and I'm thinking of top threes. But, you know, this one might make it into the top three because it was certainly a great experience. I can't wait to do a more spoiler-oriented show, and I hope those of you who have already played it enjoyed it, and I hope those of you who are going to be playing it in the next few days enjoy it as well. I will be live streaming the hard mode difficulty when it's officially launched on Twitch, so if you're curious about that, be sure to tune in. But anyway, be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. I'd avoid the comment section, honestly, if you're looking to avoid spoilers, because you never know when you're going to scroll down and see something you didn't want to see. But that's going to be a wrap for that. So thank you for watching. I will see all of you in the next video, and expect a few Final Fantasy VII guides to be coming out around the time, you know, after the game officially releases, because there's definitely some things I feel like I want to make videos on. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. And until then, take care.